Once we are ready with a Blender composition, like this data comparison, we need to render the scene so that we can get a video output, which we can upload to a social network. First we need to set up our camera, and ensure that everything looks good in this camera view, because this is what Blender will render. Now in this Render Settings tab, you need to make few changes, like here you can set the render engine. You can get the best quality if you use cycles, but it takes much higher time to render. And if you use cycles, you can also use GPU for faster rendering, based on your computer spec. Then we can ignore this viewport settings, but we need to update these sampling values under the render settings. The default value of 4096 is too high, we can reduce it to 128, or even 64. Or we can use a time limit here, to set the maximum time taken by each frame to render. Then you should enable this denoise option, to avoid noisy output. And finally under light paths, you can customize these bounces based on your scene requirements, or just go with the default values. But if you need a faster render, you can also use Eevee, which is not a bad option either. You can use the default sample values here, or maybe reduce it to 32, without much loss of quality. Then don't forget to enable the shadows, or use ambient occlusion, if you are on an older version. Then you can enable the option of ray tracing, which is a nice feature we got in Eevee-Next, from Blender version 4.2 onward. It creates a far better light and shadow, compared to the legacy version of Eevee, and you can go with the default settings, or play with them for any customization. A beautiful output from rendering depends a lot on your scene lights and the environment lighting. We have created several tutorials in this regard. The tutorial links are given below in the video description. You can check out and apply these techniques for better results. In the next step, we have to set the output properties here, and then we can render our scene, using this menu option called Render Animation. In the Render Properties tab, we have to set the output resolution, and we'll go with Full HD, which is the default. Then you have to set your frame rate here. For example, you can use 30 FPS or 60 FPS. But please remember that if you make a change in FPS, you need to again bake all the physics actions, because Blender's physics is calculated based on the frame rate we set here. Then we have to set the start frame and the end frame numbers in these fields, but there is a catch here, and we'll come back to this later. Then, we have to set the output location here. You can select some folder, where you want the output file or the output image sequence to go. Next we have to select the format for our output file. If we want a video output, we need to select FFmpeg. It will directly create a video file, which is good for a short animation, but the industry standard is to use an image format, like PNG, or EXR, which will create an image sequence instead of a video file. There are certain advantages of creating an image sequence over a direct video output. You get the raw frames without any video encoding, so there is no data loss. You can use any After Effects later to these frames. Also, you can break down the output into several small batches. You have full control over how much you want to render, and when you render it. So if you want to break it down, you can first render from frame 1 to frame number 500, and give some rest to your computer. Then render from frame number 501 to frame number 1000, and likewise you can render all 3000 frames in total 6 batches. Then if you want a transparent output, you have to use this RGBA option, otherwise RGB is good enough. And please also remember to uncheck this overwrite option, so that earlier frames are not rendered again when you render it in batches. So once we are all set with these settings for our scene, we can go to the render menu, and render the frames using this option. It will create a series of image files like this, one for each frame, in the output folder that we have selected. Now we need to create a video from this image sequence, using some video editor, so back to Blender, we will go to the video sequence editor, from this option. Then we have to go to the Add menu, and select Image Sequence. Now go to the folder that has our image sequence, then press A to select all the files, and let's add them here. It will add them as a strip. You can add multiple such strips for audio, video, or text. You can also zoom in or zoom out. So, this will be our main work area. Now we have to change the render properties in this tab, before we create the video. First we'll set the resolution as Full HD, then we have to set the frame rate as 30 FPS. Then we'll set the start frame and the end frame. This time we'll go for the entire length of our composition. Then just like before, we have to set the location of the output file. Let's save it to our desktop. And for the output format, this time we'll use FFmpeg, since we want a video. You can see the preview here, based on our image sequence. Then let's expand the encoding section. We need to set a container. The default MP4 is good enough, or you can change it if needed. Then under video codec, you have to select a codec. The default H.264 is good, it's the one most commonly used. Next, in the output quality field, we'll select perceptually lossless, which is the best trade-off between the speed and the quality. Then, if we want to add an audio track, here we have to also set a suitable audio codec. Let's see how to add an audio. First we have to go to the Add menu, and select the sound option. Then navigate to the folder where you have your music, and add it into the sequencer. Multiple such audio-video components, or text fields can stay together on different channels. So this mostly covers everything that we need to set here in the render properties. It's not a tutorial on video sequence editor, but here you can set various parameters for each strip. Like for the image sequence, we have some fields here that you can customize, although in most of the cases, you don't need to change anything. But the modifiers can be useful at times. There are various modifiers. For example, let's add a brightness and contrast modifier. Then if we change the brightness to say 5, we'll see more light in the scene. Or you can change the contrast to say 10. Once you are satisfied with the output, you can render a video using this render animation option. And we will get an output like this. It's created in Eevee. You can get even better results with cycles, but it takes much higher time to render. So I hope you liked this tutorial. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel.